Okay. Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to CV Mythbusters. Next time I choose a title for this, I'm going to try to say a word that I can say more easily. The myth. I'm tripping over it every time I say it, so I'll get my apologies out there straight away. I'm Simon Ward from the Jobs Lab, and we are incredibly lucky to be joined today by Becky Webber. Becky is the epitome of paying it forward for well over a year now. Becky has been running fantastic free webinars. I'm going to let her tell you about it, but I've watched them. I know literally hundreds of people. I think it's over 200 webinars now that Becky has done free of charge for job hunters, and everyone just seems to get a little bit better. They're always evidence based. They're very focused. So it's a real privilege for the Jobs Lab to have Becky with us. So I'm really grateful to have you with us, Becky. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure, absolute pleasure. Um, Before we get into the session itself, I just want to go through a couple of housekeeping points. So this is an informal event. So I always say that at the start of any broadcast, because that kind of covers me for any technological failure that comes along the way. That's an informal technical cock up. Or if I just mess up, that's obviously was deliberate and trying to create an informal environment for everyone to feel comfortable and feel at home. So from our perspective, one of the most important things is that you get involved and that you contribute. This is about community. Everything that the Jobs Lab does, everything that Becky does is all about community. We are not the only experts. We don't have an exclusive view of what is right. So that peer-to-peer support, talking about experiences, is equally important. So please, in the chat, tell everyone that you are open to connect so we can begin to build that community around these events that we are holding on Wednesdays and Fridays. If you have a question, we are going to try to answer the questions that were asked in the chat over the last couple of weeks a little bit later in the session. But if you have a question that you'd like to pose during it, pop it into the chat. I'm going to be trying to monitor the chat on another laptop. I mean, working with two computer screens is just a recipe for disaster, but I'm going to try. So I'll try to capture all your questions as they come in. It would also be helpful because Becky and I are in a little bit of a bubble. We don't know actually for a fact whether we're broadcasting or not. We think we are. We hope we are. So if in the chat you could just let us know, maybe just say hi or a little emoji, just to let us know that you're there. I will turn the chat on, which squeezes us up a little bit, and I apologize for that, but I don't think there is any other way around it. So I'll pop the chat on there. And we seem to have now, this is the joy of Restream. So I have a number of people who are saying hi on the right hand side, but none of it's showing up yet in our chat. So that will come through. There's a slight delay. Here we go. So first one, morning, afternoon, David. Great. So people are beginning to come in. So we know we're broadcasting. That's fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. I'll keep an eye out for questions. Let's just quickly go through what our plan is for this afternoon. One thing, if you do ask a question, as opposed to just saying hi or looking to connect, just highlight question at the start. Put your question in capitals at the start of your question. It'll be a little bit easier for me to pick that out and make sure that Becky and I answer the questions that you have. So today we're going to have 2 or 3 minutes of introductions just so you know who Becky and I are. And then we're going to look at what, in our opinion, are the 3 key myths around writing a CV that I think make it more difficult for people to have confidence in their own ability to create an effective, compelling CV. And we're just going to look at the veracity of those 3 myths, where they come from, and whether or not you should actually consider them when you're working through your CV. So that's the ATS CV, which is a really big one for everybody. Question about length of CV and whether it should be limited to 1 page or 2 page. And then we're going to look at the 6 seconds. Sorry, 6 minutes would be so much better. The 6 second rule about how long a hiring manager, a recruiter, or internal recruiter takes to evaluate your CV before they either accept or reject you as a candidate. We're then going to go back to the questions that have been asked in the chat room and try to capture as many of those as we can. And then finally, if we have time, there'll be a Q&A for people who are on the call with us, which would be great. So first of all, as I've said, we're lucky to have Becky with us, but I'm not going to try to introduce her. I'll let Becky do that job. So if you could just talk us through yourself, Becky, that would be great.
Yeah, no problems at all. Thanks again, Simon, for inviting me. And it's lovely to see you all. And also lovely to see some familiar names as well coming up in the chat. So great to see you. So some of you will probably know me from being on my webinars, some may not. So since March or April, actually, last year, I've been running, as Simon said, some free webinars for job seekers on topics such as CVs and also LinkedIn profiles, optimizing them as well, which I'll be continuing to run for the foreseeable. So as for me, I am as the slide describes, a passionate job search mentor. I'm also a leader within a staffing business called Tate Recruitment, which is owned by the second largest staffing business in the UK, which you probably haven't heard of, which is Impellum Group. So with over 20 years experience in recruitment and hiring my own staff, as well as supporting employers and job seekers throughout my time in recruitment. And of late, even though I've been more strategic in my role, I have been rolling up my sleeves and getting stuck in and back into the recruitment world and hiring myself, which is great because then it gets me closer to what's really going on and make sure that the content that I'm delivering to you as job seekers is as appropriate and as accurate as possible. So, I've got my own website, positivecareeradvice.com. Which is full of free advice and support and guides and templates and webinar access and videos. So feel free to subscribe and have a look at that. It's all there for you, all researched as well, using experts' advice and support, not just from my own head, because I don't know the answer to everything, as Simon has alluded to earlier. But that's pretty much in a nutshell all about me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Becky. I think the really important point that I want to pull out about Becky's work is just how well researched it is, how evidence-based it is. And I, along with a lot of other career coaches, have taken Becky's hard work. Hopefully we've never claimed it as our own, but we've certainly quoted it a number of times in different things that we do. So I would really advise that people have a look at Positive Career Advice. It's a fantastic resource and it can be trusted as much as anything can be trusted. Yeah, we're talking about opinions, but Becky's opinions are researched and they're informed, so they have real value. Just a few seconds about me. So Simon Ward, I was always going to be a recruiter. Mum, dad, brother, sister, and now my wife are either all recruiters or HR consultants or HR managers. So I was kind of born into it. I'm one of the founders of the Jobs Lab. The Jobs Lab is an online coaching and training business, and we are driven by the concept of effective, structured, process-driven job hunting. So we feel that there is a point in job hunting where once you have consumed and embedded the knowledge you need to run an effective job hunt, it then comes down a lot to behaviors and process and structure. So we work very hard with our members and our students to help with motivation and continual effectiveness. So we call that habitual effectiveness. So it's building the habits you need to take all the information and the expertise you have built over that first month or two of your job hunt and then apply it every day in a structured, effective way. And to some extent, today is one of those steps on the road to building that effectiveness, building that expertise. And there are lots of different resources you can go to, but it's important you get that bedrock in. At the Jobs Lab, we walk you through that educational process in a 5-week program, but we then work with you to make sure that you are effective in what you do. So that's me, as I say, around the recruitment and HR and candidate market for longer than I care to remember, and having looked at it lots of different lenses. So I've been a recruiter, I've worked in recruitment process outsourcing, I've sold recruitment process outsourcing, I've bought recruitment process outsourcing, I've been a hiring director of a FTSE 100, and I've worked in HR and resourcing transformation consultancy. So a broad view of the market. That gives me some opinions, and I'm always welcome to have them challenged. And you'll see that today, Becky and I have made the promise to each other that what we will not be doing is committing to that we have to agree with each other all the time. Everyone has different opinions. So Becky isn't here just to say, Simon, I agree with everything you say. And equally, I might challenge the odd thing that Becky says, although I'm not so sure about that. We'll see where we get to. So that's our introductions. We're going to move straight into those three myths, and I think the sensible place to start, and the one that seems to cause the most concern and agitation among job hunters, is the question of this mythical, if it is, ATS compliant CV. And this is when I first became aware of Becky. She published the most phenomenal piece of work on the ATS, which educated me. I thought I had opinions. Becky had educated them. So Becky, could you just talk us through the work you did and the findings of that work?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've got a couple of blogs and the same in articles, if you like, on my website and on LinkedIn, on my research on applicant tracking systems. How I got into it, because I was frustrated, if I'm honest with you, because a bit like what we've talked about before is the fact that there are lots of things, comments spouted around. People are very quick to jump onto, what's the common one? 75% of CVs are rejected by bots. I thought if they were that bad, that can't be true. Seriously. So rather than me just sitting there and nodding my head and thinking, oh, I'll just go along with it, I thought, no, I'm not going to. I took all my research offline. And I spoke to software developers. So I spoke to ATS providers, Resumo, Bullhorn, iSIMS, and various others as well. I spoke to talent acquisition people in large organizations, as well as being a recruiter myself. We don't have an applicant tracking system. We use a CRM, same sort of thing. They're like a filing system for candidates, is the best way to describe them. But I wanted to get to the nitty-gritty of it and actually convey the facts around applicant tracking systems. And whilst there are things that we do need to know about tech, and it's good that we educate ourselves, they are not things to fear. They are not there to put barriers in our way. They are there to help navigate applications through, from applying for a role through to being considered, to rejected, to obviously being offered a job. They are a portal, if you like, to traverse candidates through the system, and a database as well for our company's hiring efforts. So I tested CVs as well through various ATS systems, and I know that Russell Ailes has also written a really good piece of work actually very recently that you might want to tap into his article, where he's gone out to lots of organizations and recruiters and whatever, and about their behaviors. And we could dispel the myth around 75% of CVs are rejected by bots. There are only two reasons why a CV will ever be rejected instantly by an applicant tracking system. And that one reason is if your CV is too big. I mean, how likely is that going to ever be? And the other reason would be is if your CV is seen as a PNG or a JPEG, a picture, so like a scanned copy, because it can't read the text within it. Other than that, it's the human hiring behaviors you need to be most concerned about. And so it's, even though they're using tech to help them find people that are suitable for jobs, even if I look at my own behaviors as a recruiter, do I rely on tech to help me make a decision? I use tech to help me use for keywords, to find CVs to shortlist, but very often I am looking at CVs, all CVs, particularly at the moment, because there aren't so many people applying for jobs as there were last year. I'm looking at CVs and I'm skim reading them initially, which is why it's important to have your CV laid out in the right way, and you can get to the key information you need to get to as a reader quickly, so it motivates them to read on. I'm not using tech to make decisions for me, and I'm certainly not using tech to make the decision on my behalf. And if I was speaking on behalf of recruiters and talent acquisition people out there, I'm sure that they would 100% concur with me. They will use algorithms. Some ATS systems use algorithms to help shortlist applicants, but it's the human that makes the decision. That's the key thing. So I've just seen a question come in. Is CV
I thought
and
it's
Word?
relevant at this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is very relevant. You can send, I mean, if you look at Russell's work, you'll see that some of the analysis that he's done, there are very few that will accept one or the other. They'll accept both, whether it's in Word or a PDF copy. So you can send it in either. I mean, personally, I always prefer PDFs because they don't tend to move around so much. The thing is, when I tested the CVs through the ATS systems that I was fortunate enough to test my CVs through, and that was through some generous job seekers giving me their CVs, I personally found that the Word versions of the CVs parsed, and that's with an R in it, parsed through the system without distorting as much as the PDF ones. And that was, and I can only base that on evidence because I tested it myself. And that's not across all ATS systems, that's across a few of them. And each ATS system will have their own nuances. Recruiters prefer you to send the CVs in Word because of GDPR, because they need to remove your personal data. It speeds up the process. So if you want to help a recruiter out, then that's a good way to do it. But you can send your CV in a PDF or a Word version. It's just to be aware that if it's heavily formatted, then it's more likely to distort in a PDF version than it will be a Word version.
One I was just going to, I think historically PDFs became popular because candidates were led to believe there's a reason to mistrust recruiters, and so they wanted to control what was in their CV. And one of the things that we talk about a lot, and we won't get into necessarily today, is about building relationships with recruiters.
Yes.
It's not just about throwing in a CV, waiting for recruiters to do everything you want them to do, but giving nothing back. It's about building up that relationship. And if you have that relationship, listen to the recruiter. They will tell you what is needed and what is best for them, because at the end of the day, you want them to be empowered to do their best job they possibly can for you too. So build that relationship so that you can trust recruiters. I have spent years sending in PDFs or advising people to send in PDFs, but the point that Becky just made about the corruption of PDFs through the parsing process, I think is really crucial. Because then you can miss. I've seen recruiters with very long lists. If there is a corruption, they move past it very, very quickly, and
that's where you're absolutely right, Simon. We're at the mercy of the recruiter's behaviour at that point.
Yeah.
So if they have a lot of jobs that they're working on or a lot of CVs to consider, I honestly, if it's a good quality person, then you would want to put that person across. So, but you just don't want to give any reason or put any barriers in the way. So, the general rule of thumb, and if you read Russell's report as well, is to try and stick to simple formatting of your CV. It doesn't have to be an ATS compliant CV. You don't need to have an ATS CV and a normal CV. You can have one that does both. It doesn't have to be bland and boring. I mean, that was one of the reasons that I did the research that I did, because there was all this stuff about it needs to be packed with keywords. And I was looking at these CVs that were being banded around on LinkedIn, and I was sat there going, oh my goodness, they are literally wall-to-wall words. I'm dying looking at them. If I'm reading that as a hiring manager, I literally will not be able to fathom what I should be reading and what I shouldn't be reading. So if it's being, it's being eyeballed, if you like, by a hiring manager or a recruiter, it needs to be easy to navigate. That's the key thing. And it's the human that will be looking at your CV. They're just using technology, as we all do in our day-to-day lives, digital world that we live in, to help us traverse the hiring process in an easier way. So as long as we know how to navigate it and we don't see it as barriers, it doesn't have to stand in our way at all. So
I think one thing just to remind everyone, Russell, I'll put the links up to both Becky's and Russell's research at the end of the session. They're both great. They come from different perspectives in some ways, but they also overlap a lot, and they do complement each other. But one we talk about ATSs as if it's a single piece of technology. In Russell's piece alone, there were over 40 ATSs that he reviewed at one level or another. And in the same way, when we at the Jobs Lab, we talk about AHB, actual human beings, because I think that because of the technical limitations of ATS, despite the fears we've all been brought up to believe about, it is more important that you get through that assessment by a human being, whether it's a recruitment consultant, externally an internal recruiter with a business, or a hiring manager. So the point Becky made about the structure of a CV, I just think is absolutely crucial. You need to train very quickly a reader to understand where the information is and in what format it's in. And if you repeat that through your CV, and we're not talking about loads and loads of pages, we'll get to link later, but if you repeat that format through your CV, and you bear in mind, again, Becky's point about it's not really a matter of how long people read CVs for, we'll talk about that later, it's how they read them.
Yes.
So it's how do they scan? And some of the sort of eye tracking software reports that have come out, again, you can or cannot believe in the efficacy of them, but they suggest that the CVs are read in two ways. And I think logic tells me they're right. You either start at the bottom and work your way down, and that makes the top third of the first page, maybe the top half of the first page, really, really crucial to start with. And then, in my opinion, they make a decision as to whether they're going to apply more time to that CV. Or they work down what we call the capital E. So they go down the left-hand margin, look at job titles, look at employers, and then move down maybe the first line of your descriptor of each job, the first line of your, what we call a solution statement, your personal statement. And they sort of go down and zigzag down, and then they'll go back and look more closely if they get a feeling of comfort from that first piece. So structuring your CV consistently, but also thinking about how that human being is going to read the CV. How would you read it if you had 30 or 40 of those sitting on your desk or on your laptop? How would you actually address the problem? Put yourself into their shoes and think about it. I think that's really important. And the other thing I was just going to mention is that in Russell's piece, not only did 98% of those 40 ATSs allowed for both PDF and Word. So you have that choice just about across the piece. 83% of the ATSs that Russell looked at do not reject CVs. The other 16% will only reject through what Russell calls killer questions. I've known as branching questions in the past. So those sort of yes, no questions about right to work or maybe in sometimes user experience or a qualification, something that is a straightforward yes or no answer. And I think that that's important to know. You're not going to get rejected out of hand in large quantities by ATSs. So work within the confines that are sensible, but work to impress a human being rather than an ATS, and work with key phrases as well as keywords. So
Absolutely.
Phrases right. I think that's important. Keywords drive me nuts. I don't know how many CVs you've seen that don't make sense. They just don't make sense because people say, I have to look database in 17 times in my first sentence. And it just sounds like you're writing, with a stutter. It doesn't make sense. And there are some terrible, terrible ATS compliant CVs out there that are just never going to get past a human being. I think that's a real risk.
A good litmus test is if you create your CV in terms of layout is to maybe put the first couple of pages of your CV with a blank on the other side, turn it over and get someone that doesn't know you particularly well to turn it over and say, right, I'll give you 20 seconds or whatever to read that CV. What do you know about me?
Yes.
And then that might be able to highlight to you whether the layout is drawing their attention to the key information that you would want someone to see. So, and the thing is, it's like anything, if we think about our own behaviors, which is a really good point that you mentioned, don't ever underestimate how we behave as humans. If we are looking at any kind of document or thinking of buying anything, our attention needs to be grabbed by the messages that we're looking at in some way or another. So we need to kind of highlight the value very early on that we have to offer and the relevancy, and also reassure those employers as well that we are a good fit for that job. So we want to join the dots. We want to add context, but enough context, summary context, not too much to kind of send them to sleep, but enough to whet their appetite to want to know more. So, it is about making sure that we are reassuring them through our words, because we've got a lot of risk-averse employers out there. We've also got a lot of risk-averse job seekers out there as well that want to make sure they're making the right decision too. So, so it's a really good point. What have we got on the next question?
Line spacing and white space.
Is one half and one line. I think the key thing is making sure you've got white space on your CV. It's like anything. If it looks overwhelming with like some people try and the 2-page CV scenario, let's reduce the size of the font to something that needs like a magnifying glass to look at. It needs to be, 11 or a 12 font ideally, is generally what I would go for, and maybe using a slightly bigger one for headings. But you just need to make sure there's white space. So when people look at your CV, it doesn't look overwhelming. There is no right or wrong whether you should have 1.5 lines spacing between them, if I'm honest with you. I think it's, this is all based upon opinion. CVs are subjective. You ask one person, they'll give one opinion, ask someone else, they give someone else's, another person's opinion. It's all based on your own preferences. So I think as long as it's easy to navigate, I think we can sometimes overthink some of these things.
I think that anyone in advertising will tell you that white space is more powerful than words.
Yes.
It draws the eye. It draws the eye to the messages that you want. Particularly draws eyes to bullet points. So white space is important. I don't think there's a simple answer about 1 or 1.5. It's you look at it. You give it to other people and say, is this an attractive document? Is it something that people are going to work through? Is it consistent? Is the font simple? Is the background white? Just those really simple things. I put up this question or comment from Lydia because this is one of my pet hates, and it's a sort of a driver for me behind why we're running this CV myth session. I hear this an awful lot, and there are good CV writers out there, and in LinkedIn land at the moment, I guess the answer is there's really good CV writers out there, and there's Ian Viner, but I wouldn't want to say that necessarily. But I think there are problems where there are people who are selling you a dream with a CV. It's like they're selling double glazing. Suddenly you don't need heating anymore because you've got this fantastic CV. But the fact of the matter is, and what Becky and I will talk about, is you don't have a CV. You have a core CV that you then tailor, and every CV is tailored to the role. And that's where I think a lot of the CV writing services drop down, because they give you a sort of a generic CV for a generic application that hasn't been constructed for easy tailoring, and they give it to you and they walk away because that's what you paid them to do. So I'm not massively surprised, Linda, that you've had problems, but that isn't to say I'm not actually just attacking every CV writer, because there's some really, really good ones out there. But you need to make sure that your output from your CV writer does give you a tool to tailor going forward. What are your thoughts about CV writers, Becky?
I probably would say I would say the same. There are some very good ones out there. There are also those that perhaps aren't so much. So, and again, because CVs are subjective, you get so many different opinions, don't you? So you could spend a lot of money on a CV being created. It's not always going to appeal to everyone. It's like everything in life, So you make a valid point. You do have to. And I saw a question in the chat about tailoring CVs. We do have to tailor our CV, but it might be that you have 3 or 4 different types of CVs that then are a little bit less, you don't have to do so much with.
Yeah.
I always sit there and, whenever I'm delivering my webinars, the concept behind my webinars is to equip job seekers with the tools and techniques to be able to go off and create their own CV. I appreciate it's easier said than done, because creating a CV is not easy. And looking introspectively is not easy, especially when nowadays we need one that's full of accomplishments, and certainly not a cut and paste of a job description in terms of duties. We demand as hirers a lot more than what we ever used to. So and you need to stand out from the competition. So, there are some good ones out there, but you're absolutely right. You do need to tailor your CV, but again, we don't know Lydia's personal circumstances either as to why that was rejected. That's just one situation. Don't lose faith in your CV. It will work, I'm sure. If it's a good quality CV, it will work elsewhere. It may be just that particular job, and you never know who you're up against when you're going for these jobs, do you? So that's the thing.
So I've just popped this one up again because it's a repetitive question. What is becoming apparent? And I'm glad in a way that it is, because what I'm going to have to do now is I'm going to have to try to persuade Becky to come back in a week or two's time to answer some of the questions, because we're having so many questions coming through. We're going to struggle to answer them on this event, and everyone who asks a question, that question is very important to you, and I understand that. So we need to find a way to maybe do. We'll either come back to you outside the event, or I may be able to persuade Becky to come back again and just do a straightforward Q&A on the basis of questions we've been asked, and then further questions after that. Photos on CVs, Becky, what's your thinking?
Well, I've learned a lot from delivering my webinars, let me tell you. So because I have a international audience very often, so and this is the beauty of delivering these webinars, because I tell you what, when I started my webinar, it's very different now to what it was when I initially created it. The benefit I've had is that generally in the UK, we would say no photographs on a CV. It is not culturally the right thing to do. And we also know that it's open to bias, people's opinions. Now, what I have learned is that in certain countries or geographical areas, it culturally is the right thing to do, Scandinavia being a point in question. So again, there isn't a yes or no answer, but I know in the States, it's not generally, it's pretty frowned upon in terms of having photos on your CV. Some people turn around and say, oh, well, in which case then, why have we got photographs on our LinkedIn profile? um, it's you that the two complement one another. Yeah, the CV and the LinkedIn profile is different. A CV you're sending for a job because you're generally applying for a job, and you're up against a smaller collection of people that are being considered for that role. And as humans, whether we like it or not, we all have biases, and we'll always have opinions, and we will always make judgments. That is who we are. The more self-aware we become, the better, but that's how we're made. On LinkedIn, it's frowned upon if we don't have a photograph on our LinkedIn profile. But then if you think about it, we've got complete strangers looking at our LinkedIn profile in order to find us. So it's the other way around. And so our photograph is used to build trust with our audience. So a job seeker told me that, and I use this in my LinkedIn profile webinar, photofeeler.com is really, really good as a website to upload your LinkedIn profile if you want that as a bit of extra help, to see how you're perceived by complete strangers. I tried it, and believe you me, I changed my photograph within about 10 minutes of putting it on. I took a new one.
Thought, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it wasn't going down so well. Let's put it that way. So I changed it, but I wouldn't have known that had I not tried it. So that was a good tip from a job seeker who shared it with me, and many other people have since. So, but yes, I personally wouldn't add a picture of me on my CV. It's not the right thing to do in terms of bias, certainly in the UK. I think that's what we're referring to, isn't it? Photographs. Yeah.
What are your thoughts? So we go on to the next sort of standard piece of advice that job hunters are given, but it is inconsistent. Certainly in America, it's all about the one-page CV. We're beginning to see more and more about the two-page CV. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about pre-defined lengths of CVs?
Well, it's one of those things that's been said a million times over, and then we believe it to be true, isn't it? Yeah. Which is how myths and misconceptions appear and become myths and misconceptions potentially. So I always ask the question on my webinar, how long do you think a CV should be? And 99.9% people say 2 sides or 2 pages. It's always the one they get right because we are in, it's something that's instilled with us. The long and short of it is, it doesn't matter if it goes on to 3 sides, as long as it's easy to navigate and it doesn't look like a book or a manuscript. It needs to be easy to navigate. The reader, the hirer, the recruiter, the talent acquisition person needs to be able to get to the key information they need to see quickly. So if it goes on and on and on, then obviously that's going to be harder. Now, there is a few caveats to that. If you've got an academic career, if you're in interim roles, if you're in a more senior post, then I would say that you probably need to go into a little bit more detail around your background rather than just, aiming for that 2-side CV. So there is, as far as I'm concerned, it needs to be easy to navigate, whether that's 2 sides or 3 sides. Would it make a difference to me making a decision as to whether to bring someone in for interview? No, it wouldn't. As long as I can get to the information I need to see and they're right for the job.
So in preparation for today, and Becky and I touched on this in some of our conversations beforehand, I went away and I spoke to 12 HR people and internal recruitment people who I've worked with in the past. And the feedback I got, some of it which I think I agree with and thought before, which is that it is much better to have a 2.5 or 3-page CV than crushing everything into 2 pages, losing all your white space, losing your formatting, losing the impact of bullet points, just so that you hit that 2 page. And it's the predefined length that I think I get upset about and on my high horse about. Is I've written a few books, and I've never sat down and write a book and said it's going to be 425 pages long. You write, it needs to have a certain length. So it's about the rules you apply to writing your CV. And if you get those right, you'll probably get to the right length. So that was one thing. But the other thing that came back consistently, particularly from internal recruiters, but also from HR guys, was just beware that once you get onto a 3rd page, you have to have a really good reason having the information there, because it's less likely it's going to be read or focused on. The longer you go into a CV, the less focus there will be on it. So they just bear that in mind, that there has to be a reason to go into that 3rd page as well.
That's a good point, actually. I'm just going to bring up a real example of that just to illustrate that point. So where I've been rolling my sleeves up and hiring for some quite interesting roles, I had a CV sent across to me that was 5 pages long. And I regretted the applicant because they didn't have the necessary skills for the job. And I got challenged on it by the job seeker. The information that was relevant was on page 5. Yeah. So, okay, I could have read it from top to bottom, but a recruiter, this is where we go back to the hiring behaviours. They do not have the capacity to be able to read it from start to finish, which is frustrating when you plough all your energy and efforts into creating a CV. We would love it if it was read from cover to cover. Realistically, it's not. So and it's easy for people to miss information. I missed that information. And I regretted an applicant that potentially could have done the job, but it was on the last page of his CV.
And I think there's a really important general point there, that applicant had the opportunity to objection handle. So and for me that's really important in interviews as well. So when I reach a decision in an interview, I would always share that with the candidate. Now, some people say that's heartless, or you can't have given it enough thought. But sometimes you're not going to put a candidate through to the next stage or put their CV onto a shortlist to go to an employer. I always share that there and then, because it gives them an opportunity to tell me I'm wrong. And however much we hate being wrong, it's much better to be corrected than continue to be wrong.
100%. I don't mind that at all. It's not, we're all humans at the end of the day. None of us are perfect. And everyone is working incredibly hard and trying to work really, really quickly to deliver a service, whatever industry we're in. Mistakes happen, but it wasn't a mistake as such. It could have been, if there's a bit of nugget, a key bit of information that needs to be portrayed, it needs to be early on in your CV. That's the thing. Otherwise, it's likely to be missed, and that was a case in point, and that was only last week. So, and I'll always be honest. I don't mind sharing experiences at all. So there we go.
One thing I'd just like to say about the chat, and I'm so grateful for people actually engaging in the chat. So Paul Johnson asked a question about coming out of the military. And I'd just like to say thank you to Will Southers and Colin Ellis for giving him 2 pieces of great advice. I know Trish Mullen. She's fantastic in that space. I wouldn't have mentioned it. I'd have forgotten. So Colin, thank you very much for that. And Will, I don't know the list website. So it's not an area that I've worked in. It's not an area that I'm a specialist in. So that's the benefit of putting. We're not going to be able to answer all the questions today. But guys, if you know something, please put it up on the chat, because we'll all benefit from that. I'm going to go away a little bit wiser. Thank you very much, Will. And no doubt, Will, you know me, at some point in the future, I'll claim it as my own. Oh, there's Trish. Fantastic. Thank you very much. I didn't know you were on. Brilliant.
Great.
Hey. Brilliant. So we've kind of covered, and we're doing sort of chopping and changing, going through the questions as well, which is really important, because I know how frustrating it is to put a question up and not get it answered. But I hope people do understand the number of questions we're getting and how difficult it's going to be today to answer them all. So I'm trying to pick ones that illustrate some of the things that we're focusing on today. We'll go to the cover letter question in a moment, because Becky and I discussed this 2 or 3 days ago. But I also just want to, we talked about length. There is this 6 second rule piece that I think is, you personally, this is my own personal opinion. Again, it's opinion. It's informed by experience, not fact. But I feel that job hunters are often beaten up by this 6 second rule to generate a degree of fear in whether they know enough, are skilled enough to create a CV that will have impact and be effective if it's only read for 6 seconds. I put a piece up on LinkedIn about 2-3 weeks ago, just identifying where it came from, which is a 2012 Ladders report. It was a 1,033 word report looking at the behaviours of recruiters and hiring managers. 13 words out of 1,033 referred to 6 seconds. That was it. And yet, nearly 10 years later, it is completely embedded in the job hunter psyche that there is this 6 second rule. And you know that it is dubious because there's also an 8 second rule, there's a 10 second rule, there's a 30 second rule. They're all out there. And the fact of the matter is, and this is, and Becky's already said this, we don't know. And I don't know how we can know. I don't think there's a time and motion study that's going to sit by recruiters with a stopwatch, seeing when they make decisions. And every recruiter, every hiring manager I've worked with is a human being, which makes them frustrating, but also makes them all very different. So they review in different ways. So this is again one of those things I get my orange box about. It irritates me. I think it's unfair to job hunters. But I should shut up and ask you what you think.
I said this morning, I put a video up this morning, I'm obviously promoting the event, and who knows how long it takes for people to scan through CVs, whether it's 6, 10, 20, 30 seconds. As you quite rightly said, it's an individual. We're all individuals. We all do things differently. And I've never actually put a stopwatch on to actually time myself. Perhaps I should. The long and short of it is, I think the message that we need to take away from it is that initially, and I express the word initially, a hiring manager or a recruiter who is familiar with recruitment will scan your CV, will skim read your CV. So just in the essence of the words I'm using in that sentence, we know it's not going to be read fully. So we just have to take that away as a fact that we need to make our CV easy to skim read, and we need to draw attention to the key information as quickly as possible. And that comes down to how we lay it out and also the content that we provide within it. And it might need a little bit more context and whatever within it to add to that. After that time, if they've motivated and the CV is compelling and it's persuasive enough, they will then read more. So, and I can tell you at the moment, having rolled my sleeves up again, anyone that's applying for the work for the jobs through Tate, and certainly from my own personal experience, I only talk about my own personal experience actually, I'm going through every application. I am not just looking at 2 or 3 of them, I am looking at every CV. So, and I've seen some interesting looking CVs and helped people rewrite them in the last week since I've been doing it. But yeah, we just need to take away the message that they're being skim read. So forget the time, they're being skim read initially.
I think recruiters and hiring managers have had a pretty tough rap over the last 15 months or so. Some of it is a product of the environment in which they've had to work. Some of it's some dubious working practices, and nobody's perfect. We get that. But I do think, in my experience, recruiters don't look at a CV to try to catch you out.
No.
The recruiters are looking for the perfect candidate for their client. And they're optimistic. Recruiters are optimists. They have to be, otherwise you won't come into work. And I think what you have to do is enthuse them that you are that candidate. They're not going to look at your CV and try to find ways to reject you. That's not their job.
And they're not even, a CV doesn't even have to be perfect. And this is the other thing, that I've said before, you may have heard me say it, but no one is an expert job seeker. No one would want to be an expert job seeker. So we have to look beyond the black and white of the words on a piece of paper to see what there is behind it. And, good quality recruiters, and I know that obviously there's people are learning and becoming good recruiters and whatever, and there are some that maybe aren't so much so, because that's just any industry. You're absolutely right. We're not looking to catch people out. we want the right people for the roles, and where there's a opportunity, we'll be on the phone speaking to people just to see, what other information can we gather from you that will help with this application. So yeah, we are the middle person that's acting on behalf of employers' requests. That sometimes is a challenge of a recruiter, isn't it? That we are acting on the client's behalf, but we want to support you as job seekers because we want to put the right people in front of them. So yeah, we
Brilliant.
are optimists for sure.
Musa has been very patient because I've had the question up about cover letters for some time, and we talked about other stuff. But it is. Someone asked this in the event chat, and I think it's on the slide for the event chat. And I said we'll talk about it, but cover letters are almost worthy of a session on their own because they can be very important, but they can be absolutely irrelevant. But the generic question, should your CV be accompanied with a cover letter? It may be a little bit too generic, but I just what are your thoughts on cover letters?
My opinion, because it is an opinion. Cover letters sometimes will not be read. Fact. Okay. Do not replace the information in your cover letter, or take information out of your CV to put into your cover letter for that very reason. However, a cover letter is all about why you are applying for the job. What it is that you bring, which obviously will be incorporated in your CV to a certain extent as well, but it's much more of a narrative. From a personal perspective, if I was looking for another job, I would use a cover letter because I've seen it adds more personality into that application, particularly if you're going for more of a senior post in more, if it was a people orientated role. If it was a role that involved communication, comms, that sort of thing, then a cover letter could be very appropriate. But I think we create cover letters on the understanding they might not always be read. But from a personal perspective, where you can, so that you can get to know you more as a person, I would, what have you got to lose if you've actually created one or two that you can just slightly tailor to suit the job. Of course, it has to be tailored. On my website, there is a cover letter template. If anybody wants to have a look at that, they're more than welcome to check it out.
I absolutely agree. I think through the whole recruitment process, every document you create, every event you attend has a purpose. Mm-hmm. And if you are clearer on what that purpose is, it's easier to tailor it to that purpose. So in my opinion, the role of a cover letter is to get your CV read. Mm-hmm. You will not get an interview on the basis of, highly unlikely you'll get an interview on the basis of a cover letter.
Yes.
So the cover letter's job is to get your CV read. Your CV will never get you a job. Your CV will get your first interview. That's the job of your CV. And some of the longer CVs that I see that you work at tailor backwards are CVs that have been written as if there's not going to be an interview. So we're going to tell them everything in as much detail as we can, often because we don't know what not to tell them. So we'll leave everything in. But if we work on the basis that actually the job of the CV is to give them enough information for them to want to know more, and it does that job. So my view of cover letters, I agree, they're not always read. They're worth tailoring, and they should be tailored with the same kind of mindset as your CV.
Yes, yeah. Just a point on CVs in general, where it gets a bit muddy with creating CVs, and obviously we can see what question as well. It's like just aside from that, is when we're not clear about what our career intentions are. So before I delivered my webinar, I've been working for the same company for a long time, and I haven't had a need to write my own CV, but I felt it was a bit hypocritical, me not actually going through the pain of writing my CV. And it took me a while to get to one that I was happy with several versions later. But where I was going wrong was the fact that I was writing it in the mindset of this is me and this is what I have to offer, rather than writing it in the mindset of the target audience, the target employer. And that's where we often get it wrong in terms of how we're writing a CV. So we have to have clarity around what it is, where we're heading, in order to write a CV where we can remove the unnecessary, information out of it, and it's much more targeted. When we're trying to appeal to everyone, we'll end up appealing to no one. And so when we're creating our CVs, we have to do the groundwork, painful as it is, because you're eager to get onto those job boards and start applying for jobs. The groundwork you do initially to understand what it is that you're looking for in terms of your values, in terms of the type of job, in terms of the company that's going to bring out the best in you to enable you to thrive. In order for you to understand that, you have to go through that first. Then the CV becomes much more easy to create. And that's what I cover in the webinars that I deliver, some of the tools and techniques that you can use in order for you to achieve that clarity as well. So I just thought I'd add that in, because
No,
it's
it's
such a
really important.
it's so important, and I've learned that so much through the webinars that I've delivered, that where people often go a little bit awry is that we write it in the mindset of, this is me, this is what I have to offer, ta-da, and it needs to be with the target audience in mind. Just the same with your LinkedIn profile as well.
And in a way, that's tougher when you're putting a generic CV onto a job board, onto your to support your profile, or you're sending in an unsolicited CV either into a recruiter or an employer, because it is harder to drive that story when you're not. It's not a response to a job ad or a job description. But when it is a response to a job ad or a job description, we always, and I know Becky comes from the same mindset. It's about creating a solution to the employer's problem. So I put something up on the chat where someone was asking about how do you deal with a huge amount of experience, and because this experience overlapped, it looked as if the guy was 150 years old, and I understood his problem, but that didn't matter, because a CV isn't about telling an employer what you want them to know about you. It's about telling an employer what they need to know to be confident in the fact that you could potentially be the solution to the problem that drove them to hire in the first place. So all the way through our CV, we talk about solution statement. We're going back all the time to what's the problem? Why are they hiring this role? How can I solve it? Rather than, and that rule about, you don't write about things you don't want to do. The number of times I see CVs that are full up, really expensive resume real estate is taken up describing in great detail a task or a responsibility that the candidate now has no interest in doing ever again. I'm really big into reporting. I was fantastic and it was accurate. I did all this. Do you want to do reporting? Oh, no, I never want to do that again. Well, you can touch on it, but don't take up expensive real estate. So that'd be the other point I'd make. Moving on to Sena's question. This is so important. About breaks. I mean, particularly, this is relevant to maternity and relocation, but breaks generically as well. What are your thoughts?
So you need to show your breaks on your CV, but rather than just saying career break, there is huge amounts of value in sharing briefly what you may have been doing during that time. Being on maternity leave, that's, you could have, but being a mum is a job in itself. I'm a mum myself, so that's a full-time job, full stop. The skills and talents that we pick up from being well organized and all those sorts of things, and managing challenges and whatever, they're all soft skills that we're developing as being a mum. But you've also got relocation in there as well. There are attributes and soft skills that we will need in order for us to successfully manage that situation. So I think it's more about the fact of declaring what that gap is, but also embellishing with a bit more information around what we've been doing during that time, so that it then amplifies some of those soft skills that's so important in today's working world, in terms of agility, adaptability, and all those sorts of things that don't need to be listed as cliches, but they are evidenced through the experiences that we've had as well. In addition to maternity relocation, you might have been doing some training that is sharpening your skills. So we need to make sure that we're adding the things in that will add value to our application. Don't look at it as, oh my gosh, there's a gap there. What will people be concerned about? Put yourself in the mindset of the employer, thinking, okay, what could reassure me about that gap in terms of you keeping your skills up to date and all that sort of thing, and just make sure that you add that sort of information in there. There are huge amounts of attributes you would have through having a child and also relocating as well, and there may be other things that you've done too. So they are positive experiences in your life that make you the person that you are, with the value that you have to offer. So we need to make sure that we're portraying that in the best way possible in our CV.
Yeah, absolutely. The golden rule is be honest.
Yes.
in everything with job hunting. Be honest. That is your starting point. But don't be lazy with your honesty. Don't just say it was a career break. Be intelligent with your honesty. Look at how you can turn it into a positive. And
Yeah.
and I also think a lot of us have had enforced career breaks through the pandemic where we have been job hunting. And my advice on that would be present your job hunt in exactly the same format and the same way you present your previous job. So in our formatting, that'd be 2.5 lines of a descriptor, what your why you were doing it, what your purpose was, and then a few bullet points around the key skills you have used and the key accomplishments that you have achieved during your job hunt. Turn it into a job. There are so many skills that
Yeah.
job hunters use every day that are transferable into their next job, whether it's communication, written and verbal, whether it is research, whether it's data analysis, or there's I put a post.
Networking.
Your networking. There's about 15 of them I put up on a post. You can use those and you can evidence how you've actually developed those skills during your period of job hunting and turn it into something positive and something that you have consciously tried to develop your skills with. It's a little bit like the what's your greatest weakness question. No one's really interested in what your greatest weakness is. They want to know how self-aware you are, how honest you're going to be about it, and whether you put anything in place to improve yourself. In the same way with your job hunt, be honest and show how your job hunt has improved you, how you've become more resilient, how you've been able to work at home, how you've been able to work alone, how you've maintained your motivation, what effectual habits you put in place to ensure you continue to be effective. There's so much you can talk about, and just putting job hunting for 12, 15 months, whatever. It's true, but it's a waste of an opportunity to identify those skills, I think.
100% agree. Yeah.
And I think that's important. I'm really glad we're getting questions coming through all of the time. Some of them are quite specific, and I've tried to pick the more generic ones wherever I can. With the more specific ones, I will be going through this, and I will try or ask Becky to try to come up with somewhere, maybe through Loom or something, where we can give you feedback on those specific ones. What I'm conscious of is that we haven't actually, it's coming up to an hour, and I don't know how long you have, Becky. I really should have asked you before we started.
Okay, I can carry on for a bit.
But we also were asked a number of questions through the chat, and there might be some benefit in just going and having a little look at those, because people very kindly put those onto the chat. Get rid of my ugly face. So it's kind of, there's a slight formatting error in the bottom right hand corner. I had a chance to put it right just before we started, and I decided not to in case I just blew the whole thing. So there is another question to the right that I can't remember what it was, but there's enough here. Becky, do you want to pick a question?
Yeah. How do you avoid a CV becoming just a list of tasks?
Yeah.
Yep. It can be a challenge for some, because it's much easier to see the value in other people than it can be sometimes to see the value in ourselves. It goes back to the point I made earlier about when you're creating your job search marketing material, and I talk about that as a collective aspect rather than just your CV, because it's more than just your CV. You need to understand what it is that you want, what value you bring. I think if anything, for people that have found themselves out of work and haven't been on the job market for some time, it's taught us that actually our CV needs to be a working document that we have throughout our whole career, not just when we are thrown into this a challenging situation where obviously we then have to think of everything on the hoof and start to become a job seeker overnight. So keep your CV as a living document so that you're capturing all those accomplishments and successes along the way. But the key thing is to really spend the time understanding the value that you bring. There are some exercises that I go through on my webinars, 3 different exercises. If you go onto my website, you'll see there's a guide written around obviously creating a CV and some of the pre-work that's required. But if I was interviewing a job applicant, and I wanted to find out a bit more about what they were what kind of value they bring, I would be asking them interview-based questions like, can you give me an example, of a time you felt most successful? And then start to extract information from there. So sometimes people find it easy to put themselves in a situation where they are asking themselves some interview related questions to draw out the value that they might bring. Also, you can cast your mind back to one-to-ones that you've done with your managers, and also the feedback that you receive from your customers potentially, or what you're the go-to person for. What do people always come to you for? Because you are the font of wisdom and the value that you can bring. If you look at the formatted CV, or the CV format I've got on my website, you'll see that even with all the bullet points under, I've made the name up, but it's Imogen Smith, my fictitious candidate. I probably should have thought of something much more sort of standard generic, but Imogen, I've always liked the name Imogen. You'll see that even the bullet points on there, they don't have to have a pound note or a dollar sign or a percentage against them. They are impactful statements that actually are accomplishment driven. We can sometimes get hung up on the fact that we have to have a number associated with it to have impact. So have a look at that. The other thing is, I was doing a one-to-one with a job seeker last week, and she was being she didn't feel that she could claim some of the value that she brought to the role, because she was basically doing business analysis to come up with how the company should spend their money, where they should spend their efforts. And because she didn't see the project all the way through, she felt she couldn't claim the business impact at the end of it. But of course she could, because what she did was instrumental in making the right decision to go down that pathway. So I think sometimes we can overthink things and be bashful. But the key thing is making sure that we are considering all of the value that we've brought in previous roles. Think about the problems that you have helped with solving before, and that you articulate those in your CV. The guides on my website will help you with that. What else would you add to that, Simon?
Well, I was just before, not much to add to that, to be honest. I thought that was comprehensive, and I just popped up Jenny's comment because it goes to a much broader issue in my book. I had a very similar situation with my mother, and I know how tough it can be. But I just wanted to use Jenny's statement just to remind us all that recruiters, hiring managers, internal HR people, internal recruiters know that they are hiring human beings.
Yeah.
And you don't have to worry about showing your real self, either in your collateral or in your interview process. It is important that you're honest. I think caring for an elderly parent is one of the most challenging things in so many ways. And there are so many things you learn about yourself. There are so many things you can then apply to another role. You improve your communication, your influencing skills. There's so many things you can do. But I just wanted to use Jenny's comment to just say, don't forget you are a human being, and a human aspect from start to finish through your recruitment process is a really positive thing. You are allowed to have made mistakes. It's how you've addressed them, how you've mitigated that risk going forward in the future to make sure you don't make the same mistake again that an employer will look at. You don't get, in my experience certainly, I haven't seen hiring managers cast people aside because of a single error or a single experience that they have had in their past. They look for a trend, but most of all, they're looking for the best solution to their problem. And if the best solution to their problem means it's a human being, then being human isn't a bad thing. So I just think we need to be confident in who we are throughout this process. And I think that the longer a job hunt goes on, the more that confidence can be challenged.
Mm-hmm.
The more that we are seeing weaknesses in ourselves that other people don't see. And I think that can be incredibly damaging.
I 100% agree with you, and I cover this in my webinars as well. We talk about limiting beliefs, the little the imposter syndrome, and the little voice in the gremlin that's saying, why would anyone want to employ me if I've got a gap on my CV, or I've had several jobs in quick succession through no fault of my own, and it's all about, there's always a positive to come out of that, the other side. And as you absolutely correctly say, we are all humans. Soft skills are so important in today's working world. Yeah, you can in some, not all professions, of course, there are hard skills that are necessary in in particular professions, but it's easier to train people those hard skills, but you need to have those soft skills in the first place, those human skills. And you're absolutely right. I've got a very I've got poorly relatives, or a couple of poorly relatives. I have learned so much about myself during this time of being in this situation, about how I respond to things, how the organization skills of how I've got to find information out for them, and all those sorts of things. Those are all important attributes that add value to us as human beings, and we shouldn't shy away from them, and we shouldn't be ever ashamed. I think we attach shame so much to things, whether we make a mistake or whether we've had a gap in our CV. It's actually about, how can I reverse this? How can I change this into something that's positive, that demonstrates the person who I am, that will add value to your organization?
And Jenny, I've never met anyone who doesn't have parents. They may or may not know them. They may or may not be close to them. They may not care for them, but they have them. And everyone has their own experience of having parents. And often when you get to my age, you suddenly find you are one, and you want to try to use that experience to change your children's view of parents. But a lot of people have actually come up on the chat saying, yeah, I've looked after people. I've cared for people through as a palliative carer, etc. Just be honest, be human, and don't have fear about being yourself throughout the process. We are moving on for time, so I just wanted to, one question I'd like to highlight is the one in the center of the slide that says, I'd like to know how to actually manage a young CV. I assume by that you mean an early career CV, but the bit that I'd like to focus on, because that again is almost a webinar on its own, when you are looking forward to changing sector, because that can happen at any point in a CV, and it is happening more now probably than at any time in my career. There are more people I'm talking to who are considering a really substantive change in direction in their careers, and we're also being encouraged to do it through all the talk about the big resignation, etc. So Becky, how do you handle that move from one sector to another?
It ties in with one of the other questions, actually, on this particular slide about functional CVs. So obviously there are different variations of style types with CVs, and when you are, if you're looking to traverse into a different sector or a different type of job, conventional sort of recruitment methods might not work as well for you, because you're always going to be thrown into the pot with maybe people that have got experience already, as an example. But in terms of the CV itself, the functional CV, which is one that, just for those that may not be familiar with it, a functional CV is more aligned with your transferable skills. So it highlights your transferable skills, and then you can put your accomplishments underneath them. So again, there's a functional CV of type on my website that you can access for career change. As a hiring manager, functional CVs in its fullest format, where they don't go into the chronological background, employers don't like those. They like to see where you've worked before. So I would never go with a fully functional CV. So with how I would overcome that, my opinion would be that you would have a partial functional CV and a partial chronological CV. So again, I've got the format of a CV on my website that you could look at, and you'll see what I mean, because it's much easier to see it. So the beginning bit would be the profile at the top, a little bit about me, and then underneath it would be key skills and accomplishments, where you would draw out what transferable skills that you potentially have that would be most relevant to the job that you're looking to go into. And then underneath each of those particular transferable skills, you would then provide evidence, accomplishments that would be relative to demonstrate and prove that you have those skills that you could then transfer into another sector or another type of role. So that, to me, would be the clearest way to convey that. A point to note when you are looking to go into a different sector or a different type of role, as you quite rightly say, Simon, some people have had no choice but to do that because of what we've been going through with COVID, would be that you need to extend your search for jobs, not by relying wholly on applying for jobs online, because like I say, you're throwing yourself into the mix of high competition. This is where you need to use your network, and you need to be talking to people, so you become more visible in the marketplace, so that you can actually attract jobs to you rather than you just relying on jobs that are out there. So through networking, through speaking to people to find out where your gaps are, so you can see what you can do to plug them, to speak to people in the sector already, so that you can humanize your job application rather than it just being a piece of paper that lands into a ATS portal or into someone's inbox. What else would you add to that, Simon?
The only thing I would add to that is that if you are moving into a new sector, the likelihood is your CV and at a later stage you will be interviewed by someone who's made their career in that sector.
Mm-hmm.
And those individuals are not going to want to see their career, their sector just being a safety net because you've been pushed out of another sector. So think about either in your solution statement or having an objective statement, a positive statement that justifies why you want to move into that sector.
100%.
That's really, really important that you have a reason, because I think there'll be a lot of people who'll be very suspicious of those reasons. As there are some very obvious markets that are struggling and continuing to struggle. But personally, if I was in, I mean, recruitment actually is a bad example in professional services. So if I was in SAP had a terrible time in the late 90s. That's how old I am. And suddenly we started hiring loads and loads of .com guys. If I had interviewed an SAP guy who had no reason at all to move technology other than the fact he couldn't get a job as an SAP person, I know these things are cyclical. I know that I'm not hiring for long term if that guy's going to jump straight back out and go into SAP. I wanted to see a commitment as to his belief in what e-commerce was going to do to the economy and how it was going to serve the business I was hiring director for. So I wanted to see that commitment. I think it's really important that we need to do that. And there are ways you can do it both in interviews and in CVs, whether they're functional or chronological.
Yeah. In fact, actually, just to pick up on Roy's comment that's in the chat, actually, because the point I missed actually with my response as well was about the young CV. So I have a section on my website called Early Careers. And again, you'll see in the format of the CV there's an element of a functional CV used for a graduate. So a graduate type of, someone that's got a degree and obviously is leaving to go into the workplace for the first time. And there's also a CV format for a first CV. So if you've got young children that are obviously leaving school and looking for part-time work or an apprenticeship, and this is all done through experience because I have children myself who I've helped 3 of them into apprenticeship roles. There is a formatted CV on there that will help with creating a CV for someone that has absolutely very limited experience whatsoever other than just education. So there's a couple of different variations on there, just to mention that, Roy, because I know that you've just put that in the chat as well.
The only thing I would add to that is, Roy, you've bitten off a fair old task there. I think I've done it with a couple of my boys, but just remember that I've run a lot of graduate hiring programs, people like Legal and General, large organizations. We never look to hire the person who walks into the room. We are looking to hire what that person can become.
Yes.
So it's potential. More than anything else with young people, it's potential. Where are they going to get to? How am I going to get a much better return on investment by bringing them through this formal graduate program or into an apprenticeship or into a junior role? So when you're constructing that CV, think about evidencing a story that hasn't finished yet.
Mm-hmm.
Where is that individual going to get to? And what are the signs that they have the capability, both intellectually, personally, character-wise, to get somewhere beyond where they are today? Because that's what people are hiring. I think that's true probably of most hires, but particularly in graduate hires.
And don't underestimate what you do outside of your day job, or your normal day to day. That there's a big element around extracurricular activities as well, and the skills that you bring from that. If I think about it, I work in recruitment. Okay, I've got a hobby, which is I create a website to help job seekers with loads of content. I do loads of research, and that I've created my own website on my own, which went through several crates of wine to be able to do it, because it was a horrendous process. I've never done it before, but it's a skill that I've learned to do. It's not something I want to repeat, to be fair. But the fact is, I was determined enough to do it. And I did see it through, and I keep it up to date, and various other bits and pieces I do. But we underestimate sometimes what we do out of our day to day, that we take for granted, that actually can add value towards that potential that Simon's referring to as well, not just for young people, but also for all generations of people. Because let's face it, we are in a world where jobs are changing, jobs are disappearing, and new jobs are being created. So we have to reinvent ourselves all the time and keep our skills up to date. So it's important we remember, whatever age we're at, what is it we do that could add value to that job in the future.
And the one other thing I'd say to Roy and anyone else who finds themselves in a situation where you're advising a young person about their first CV or early stage CV, my experience is there is a greater risk at that time in life, and at that time when young people are less secure about their extracurricular activities, their academic qualifications, whatever. There is a predication to maybe exaggerate, and that can cause huge problems. And if you are working with an individual to create the CV, make sure that you are a sounding board that challenges some of the more elaborate statements that might be made on a CV. Because I think what I find with a lot of young people is they think the job is the purpose of what they're doing is to get an interview. Well, to some extent it is, but then your CV is going to be in front of the person on the other side of the desk when you're being interviewed. So you're going to have to justify those statements, looking someone in the eye and going through that process. So just be that sense check. Make sure that they're not tempted to elaborate because they're lacking in confidence about what their story is and what their backstory is. And I tend to see that more with young people and people who have been job hunting for a long time. They're sort of reaching a little bit, and it may help them get an interview, but it blows up in the face in the interview. So just be careful about that. We've been going for an hour and a quarter now. There are still questions on the chat from the chat room, and that was only a selection of the ones that we had coming through. I know that we probably only answered 1 in 3, 1 in 4 questions that have come through the process. Becky, as you say, Becky's fantastic, and this is her part-time job. This is her hobby. This is stuff that Becky does in her spare time. But I'm very conscious as well that Becky's a very, very busy woman as ops director of a hugely successful and really high quality, really well-regarded recruitment business that works for, in my opinion, one of the best large groups of recruitment organizations in the country. I engaged with Impellum through an outsourcing process many years ago, and they're just phenomenal. But I am nevertheless going to see if I can persuade Becky at some point in the not too distant future to maybe come back and we just do a straight Q&A so that we can pick up on the things that we haven't had time to do today. Because as I said earlier, every question is the single most important question to you when you ask it. So we're not treating them with a lack of respect. We're just running out of time. And also, I'll be completely honest with them, I'm off on holiday. So I've got a day and a half by the seaside with my 6-year-old. And I'm keen to get there before it gets dark.
Sacred time. Yes.
I have thoroughly enjoyed today. I am absolutely touched and impressed and grateful for the engagement of our audience and the support you've given each other. And I've learned stuff reading the chat, and I've only been looking at bits of it backwards and forwards. So all of you that have engaged, everyone that has opened themselves up to connections, everyone that's tried to help other people in the chat, I'm incredibly grateful. So thank you very much for that. We will, at the Jobs Lab, we're aiming for every Friday and Wednesday starting next week. There won't be anything this Friday. I won't be back from the seaside, but we will be doing it. We will be doing it from next week. But more than anything else, before we finish, I'd just like to say a really, really big thank you to Becky, not just for everything she's told us today, which has been fantastic, but Becky deserves a really, really big thank you from the community of job hunters for what she has done over the last 15 months. And I don't think there's anyone else that has done what Becky's done. And it just deserves a huge recognition and a really big thank you, because your webinars are phenomenal. The time you've put in is great. And if you built that website on your own, could you come and do mine?
Oh, no. No. I always love to help, but no doesn't come out of my mouth very often, but no, I couldn't go through that again. But thank you for having me. And I wouldn't do it if I didn't love doing it. So there you go. That's the simple answer to that one. And if you'll have me back again, I'd love to come back. So there you go. You didn't have to ask me. I'll volunteer myself.
Brilliant.
There you go.
Thank you very much. I'll leave the chat in the event page open and put some links in there over the next 24 hours and answer any questions. I'm also going to try to use a new piece of technology, which is Try Something, I think it's called, or something like that. I've forgotten the name of it, but it will. I'm really keen to find out what you thought, how we could improve this. We talk to job hunters about continuous improvement all the time, so we need to eat our own dog food. As an old non-executive director of mine once said, we will be eating our own dog food. We'll be trying to improve. So if you have 2 or 3 minutes and you're prepared to answer 10 questions on what you thought of this, I'll be getting a survey out to you just so I can capture that stuff as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably time for us to go. I'm amazed you're all still here. Thank you so much. And I'm off to the seaside and Becky's off to a full-time job. So
yeah,
thanks again. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed. I'll see you soon.
Thank you very much. See ya.
Bye.